Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session with the two of the great leaders of the Center for Threat-Informed Defense and in the attack community. And I'm really pleased to have Rich Struse and Jon Baker here with us today. These two, so I've been working with them for over a year. I'm Jonathan Reiber, Senior Director for Cybersecurity Strategy and Policy at AttackIQ. And I've been working with both of them for over a year, and it's been one of the best parts of my work at AttackIQ to learn from them and benefit from their work around attack, their government service, the research that they've done. So really briefly, and you can read their bios on the website, we have Richard Struse. He's the director for MITRE Engenuity Center for Threat-Informed Defense. Great history of government service and innovation in this space. And Jon Baker, who's the director of research and development at MITRE Engenuity Center for Threat-Informed Defense. Also tremendous background at MITRE and research and pioneering this work. So today, what we want to do is we want to talk about a little bit about the origins of the center and the history of attack, and look at the research that the center has done in a very short period of time to change the game in cybersecurity. And I'm just going to be here to moderate the discussion and ask some questions of Jon and Rich, who obviously you want to hear from. But when you think about applying attack and making the most of the threat framework, these two gentlemen are really the leaders in the field. So Rich and Jon, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having us, Jonathan.
Great. Yeah. So one of the things we talked about, Rich, was the sort of the origin story, like an X-Men Wolverine origin story of the center. So why don't we start with that? I think that's a good topic.
Yeah, I think, but our origin story is much cooler, and there's many more explosions and car chases. And also just want to thank the folks at AttackIQ for doing this conference. I think it's great to see the creation of resources like this for the benefit of the entire community. So kudos to you and the entire AttackIQ team. The origin story, we always try to start with why. And before I got to MITRE in 2017. I was at the Department of Homeland Security as the Chief Technology Officer for what at the time was called the NKIC. And in that role, I created the STIX and TAXI Cyber Threat Intelligence Sharing Standards. But in that process, what I often did was meet with organizations from around the world who are interested in some aspect of cyber threat intelligence and its sharing and making it actionable. And I would be in these meetings with incredibly smart and talented and passionate people from, maybe financial institutions and government and different kinds of organizations, up on a whiteboard talking about great ideas and all the things we could do and how we could collaborate. And it was usually about halfway to the car or the metro, depending upon how I got to that meeting, that this sinking feeling would wash over me. Nothing's ever going to happen as a result of this meeting. And it wasn't because of a lack of expertise or passion or a need to collaborate. It was just the mechanics and the logistics and the legal and the financial, all of those hurdles that would now have to be overcome to work on this one problem were almost always too great for that collaboration to actually see the light of the day. So, when I got to MITRE in 2017, Jon and I had already been working closely together when he was at MITRE and I was at DHS on STIX and TAXI. And very quickly after I joined, we got to work on solving this problem, on building an environment where smart and talented and passionate people from organizations in the private sector from around the world could come together and actually go from, that's a great idea, you could do this, we could do this, and the next step is actually working on it. And that was our vision, that was our goal, that was our aspiration. And honestly, I'm just thrilled and always a little surprised that we actually that's exactly what we've done. And folks like AttackIQ, as founding members, have been a key part of this. But we now have an environment where whether it's an idea that we come up with or one of our participant organizations or one from the community, we actually go from that's a good idea to working on that usually in a matter of weeks. And
Yeah.
so that,
Yeah.
to my mind, is critically important.
Yeah, and I want to get into the research and tell folks a little bit about that in a minute. But I think it might be useful for folks who aren't as familiar with the Center for Threat Informed Defense as I am to talk a little bit about its composition and purpose for just a minute, if you could.
Sure. So, people might be familiar with MITRE as a 60-something-year-old nonprofit organization that operates federally funded research and development centers. And MITRE is the creator of things like CVE and ATT&CK. But MITRE is really very much focused on working directly with the federal government and isn't really set up to work with the private sector. So one of the hurdles that we had to overcome when Jon and I were building out the idea of the center is working to figure out how MITRE could better engage with the private sector. And in the process of that, and for lots of reasons, not just the center, MITRE decided to stand up something called MITRE Engenuity, which is a parallel nonprofit tech foundation where the focus of MITRE Engenuity, instead of being the US government, is actually everyone else, the global private sector. And so in doing that, the center's remit is to work directly with sophisticated organizations in the private sector to, as we say, advance the state of the art and the state of the practice in threat-informed defense.
So cool. It's such a cool thing. And can you talk a little bit about some of the public members, in case folks haven't seen the list? It's really impressive, right?
If you go to the center's website, you'll see our membership. We really are proud that we have a diverse membership. That we have some of the leading, Fortune 100 financial institutions and healthcare institutions. We have professional services organizations, communication firm, technology companies, and then cybersecurity companies as well. And so, what we believe is that diversity of opinion, but all from a very sophisticated vantage point, make all of the work we do that much more impactful, because we're not just solving the problem, looking at it through the lens of, a vendor solution or a particular, end user perspective. We're really trying to blend that as much as possible. So the work that we create and wind up releasing, then hopefully is as impactful to the broadest community as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's changing the world, and I'm not biased just as a member from AttackIQ, but as a cybersecurity person who's been doing this for a decade. So I'm excited for us to get into that. But if we could start with some definition and some doctrine up front. The term threat-informed defense is intuitive for some, but perhaps not for everyone. Can you talk a little bit about the definition and the meaning and why you chose to make that so important for your center's name?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that words matter, and actually having names for things matter. And so when I got to MITRE, Jon and most of the attack team and the attack effort has been under Jon's organization for years now. When I got to MITRE, there was all these people inside of MITRE and this growing, very organic community that was sort of where people are self-identifying as members of the attack community. And there was a set of activities about looking at your defenses through the lens of attack, and then, creating detections based on specific attack techniques, and then validating those detections using, breach and attack simulation or adversary emulation. And so, but that takes a long time to say. And I was walking down the hall at MITRE one day. I can still remember where I was, and I said, "We need a name for this. We need a name for this." And I just said, "Threat-informed defense." And
really,
and that's literally, and then I said, "And that's the name of the center." And then we just had the simple part. Once I had done all the hard work of coming up with the name, then I said to Jon, "All right, Jon, let's build the center, and you can do most of that."
So you actually coined the term threat-informed defense like in a hallway.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Now I want to be clear. I have no claim to any of the work in attack. That work started in 2012 at MITRE by folks who were trying to solve an operational problem, which is, I think, one of the great things about attack. is that it's rooted in people with operational responsibility solving real world, like near term today kind of problems. And so when I got to MITRE, there was already all this great work that had been done. I just saw our opportunity, and this is where Jon and I really saw an opportunity to continue our collaboration, to take this thing, this community, this movement, and all this energy, and try to create a little more focus. And so we often will talk about the center as the focal point for the threat-informed defense community. We don't create ATT&CK in the center. That is, ATT&CK is managed and run as this internal research effort at MITRE. But we see ourselves as the curators for all these cool things around ATT&CK, how to make ATT&CK better, and how to make it easier for people to use ATT&CK and everything else in threat-informed defense, because threat-informed defense is bigger than just ATT&CK. I think ATT&CK is a key foundation, but you'll see from the center over the next 12 months, us beginning to do work in areas that are outside of ATT&CK, like adversary engagement, where you're meeting the adversary within your environment and using things like cyber deception to impose costs on adversaries. So, but that's how I sort of view it. That's
awesome. And I didn't know that you were going to do that. That's really cool. So briefly, I'm suspecting that most of the people who are tuning in are familiar with ATT&CK. I think actually, if either one of you have the chance to bring up the navigator on screen, that might be cool to just show, maybe Jon, when we pivot to you in a minute. But a story that I like to tell about the impact of ATT&CK. I've now been doing this cybersecurity for longer than almost anything in my life. I suppose I was a painter as a kid, and I did that for 18 years. But now I've been doing cyber for 11, so that's a long time, right? And I remember my boss, Jim Miller, was out of the office in December 2011 or something like that, and there was an intrusion. And it was one of the biggest intrusions that had happened. It was on a major financial organization, and we couldn't talk about it. And I remember reading about this intrusion on JWICS, which is the highly classified thing. And we couldn't talk in the community about what had happened, even with people who had clearances. We couldn't talk about the tactics of the user, of the adversary, because there wasn't a lot of forensic data about it. And it was just so compartmented, and there was no way to share this knowledge, right? And that problem remained for the first 3 years when I was involved in the field. Then I was briefed on the Lockheed Martin kill chain. And then when MITRE ATT&CK came out, for the first time you have this periodic table of the 12 techniques with all the hundreds of sub-techniques below it. And for the first time you can describe the adversary behavior. And fast forward from that intrusion 11 years ago to today with SolarWinds, and you have DHS's CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, using MITRE ATT&CK to describe the tactics of the adversary in its alerts to the world about one of the biggest breaches in the federal government in history. And so the sort of function of ATT&CK, and everyone that I've talked to since a year and a half at AttackIQ is really they love it. It's this tool for everyone to use as a single sheet of music. So it's been transformative, and it's amazing to see the center now come in for the mission that you just described to come into its own and do all this work. So Jon, how does the center work with ATT&CK? What is the relationship with ATT&CK? And if you want to talk a little bit about some good examples for how it works, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, the first year and a half or so here running the center has been really exciting. In that time, we've grown both our set of participants, and we've now run and delivered 6 different research projects where we've published the results of that work. And that work has ranged from developing capabilities that are sort of ATT&CK adjacent, making it easy for users to operationalize ATT&CK, to looking closely at the ATT&CK for Cloud matrix, or collaborating with the ATT&CK team to develop the container techniques matrix. I thought I would stop and talk about that one just a little bit as a great example of collaboration with the MITRE ATT&CK team. So when we think about our research projects, we kind of break things down and think of things from the range of, there's a problem that we want to try to tackle. all right, well, what's our solution to that problem? And if we're successful, what's the impact of that of solving that problem, right? And so with Attack for Containers, we'd already had this sort of growing energy and interest among our center participants in the community to better understand the sort of real world adversary behaviors and container technologies. The team at Microsoft had done a great job kind of starting to bring some focus to that by publishing a Kubernetes matrix about a year or so ago. And that was like some of the indicators leading up to us working with our center participants to form a project that would really dig into figuring out, is there sufficient intelligence to drive the development of an extension to the MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base to cover container techniques. So ultimately, our problem there was that defenders really didn't have visibility into how adversaries were operating and achieving their goals in container technologies, and we formed a project driven by that problem. And ultimately, if you go to the ATT&CK website today, you'll see that there's now a container techniques matrix. We worked very closely with our center participants to formalize that matrix. We worked with the broader cybersecurity community by publishing a draft matrix, sharing that, collecting feedback, and then ultimately turning that into a recommendation as input into the ATT&CK knowledge base. And the version 9 of ATT&CK release that happened at the end of April included the container technique matrix. So it was really cool. From my perspective, I think it's awesome that what we've done is we've empowered the private sector to work collaboratively with us to identify a problem, work towards a solution, and expand out our knowledge of adversary behavior so that we can orient our defenses there.
I just want to emphasize something that Jon said about container techniques, because I think it is a great example. We had a number of center members who saw this as a priority and said, we want to make this happen. And in the absence of the center, it's not clear how that would have happened or where the resources that it would take to do all this work would have come from. Because MITRE funds ATT&CK through a very limited pool of internal R&D money. So it's not like there's some magic fountain of money that just funds everything on behalf of the community. So we had center participants step up to make this work happen. But then the critical thing to understand is we then solicited, and the ATT&CK team solicited, intelligence contributions from everyone in the community. So this wasn't just about looking within the center for the best possible data on container techniques. It was looking to the broader community. And that's, to my mind, a really great balance. Our members get to drive things to make sure it actually happens. But then because everything we create in the center is ultimately made freely available to the world, we're driving impact to the broader community. And wherever possible, we're bringing contributions from that community into the work we do.
Yeah, this is a really interesting new model for doing research in cybersecurity, right? So you come out of the public sector, Rich. Jon, you've been working at MITRE, which is like public and private engagements because of the way it works. And now you've brought in these Fortune 100 companies that are collaborating on research for the first time with you. So this is like, when you think about cybersecurity, which has public impacts, public sector impacts, and the public sector is responsible for it, and yet the private sector owns and operates so much of the space and sees so much of the threat of the adversary behavior. And then you have the public education component, which is like the world is trying to learn how to deal with this. It's really like what the center you've built is achieving so much in those three areas. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about sort of some of the collaborative benefits, like any of the lessons you've seen that you've learned in the last year and a half about that kind of collaboration.
So a couple of things, and I'll say that I think even though I did 6 years in the federal government, it just seemed longer. Most of my background is as a technology entrepreneur, and so I'm a firm believer. There's a role for the public sector, there's a role for government in sort of driving at the policy level and sort of, creating some sense of the level playing field. But ultimately, this is a problem that affects the private sector and has to be addressed primarily by the private sector. And so, it's great to see the work that CISA is doing. I think that's exactly, they're really out there championing and hopefully creating demand signals to the rest of the community. Hey, this attack thing, you should map your threat intelligence to it because it makes it easier for everyone to consume. But, the private sector we need to start really, shouldering a burden and stepping up. And so the center makes it easier for organizations that are ready to sort of assume that mantle of leadership.
Yeah.
Or already are leaders in their industry, but really want to now carry it forward into cybersecurity to actually put their money where their mouth is and work in an environment where we can collaborate quickly to develop projects. John mentioned we have 6 released projects. We have 8 projects that are running right now. So for a total of 14, and we have 30 odd projects in the pipeline. So we've become a machine to turn out R&D on a regular basis. So we're not doing 1 or 2 projects and releasing a white paper, once every year or 2. Yeah. We're cranking out stuff which you then find up on GitHub that the center's made available to everyone.
Yeah, let's get into some of that, John. Yeah, totally.
When I think about, over the last year or so, what we've learned through the research program and engaging with the private sector to advance threat-informed defense, I don't know, Rich, I think one of our bigger innovations really is the overall model for engaging with industry and executing research projects to solve problems for the public good. As we run these projects, we're continually learning. We're continually trying to figure out how do we make it more efficient to go from that's a cool idea and a problem we should try to solve to a running project to delivering a quality set of results for the community to leverage, right? So we've positioned ourselves in a way where we can continually refine that research and development engine to make it so that we can just focus on the research problems and running research projects and delivering impactful results, right? And so I think that's been one of the areas where we've learned a ton over the last year and a half and really one of our greater innovations with the center.
Yeah. It's an amazing amount of work that you've produced. Can you talk a little bit about some of the big rocks that have come out? I think the adversary emulation library and the NIST framework.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the adversary emulation library is a sort of a great story of kind of us coming together with our center participants and trying to be responsive to the broader community around adversary emulation. Rich alluded to it earlier, but I've been at MITRE for a long time, and I've run a department there that's focusing on adversary emulation and cyber threat intelligence. Through the course of our work, we've done a lot of development of adversary emulation plans, but they were all kind of like these individual one-offs. They were really valuable when we could publish them. We did some of that work for our government sponsors and couldn't share it. And as we went along, we learned a ton about what it takes to do adversary emulation well, right? And the reality is that there's a pretty high bar, a high cost entry to go and develop an emulation plan and actually execute that emulation plan in a organization. So with the adversary emulation library, we worked with our center participants to kind of step back, take a look at all the lessons learned and start to normalize around one way of representing emulation plans that are fundamentally intelligence driven, and are aiming towards making it as easy as possible for a organization to pick up that emulation plan and use it in their organization to test out their defenses. Ultimately, our goal is that each and every plan in the library has its same very consistent look and feel. So if you're familiar with one, you can pick up the next one. And we would love to see the emulation plans adopted and picked up by industry, made available in different products, so that end users can easily action those emulation plans. At this point, we've developed 2 different emulation plans through center R&D projects. We have worked with the attack evaluations team to kind of standardize the way in which they describe their adversary emulation plans with each round of attack evaluations. We now add that plan into the library. So all of this work that MITRE and MITRE Engenuity have been doing around adversary emulation, we're trying to bring together into one format, one venue, to make it really accessible to the community. And we work with our participants to continually evolve the contents of the library to figure out what groups we should be focusing on next. Where are the places that we should be looking to expand out that library over time? It's definitely something where we've learned a lot just through the course of like looking across all our work and bringing it together in one venue for everybody. And that in itself has been really exciting, and just seeing it get really broadly used across industry has been great to see. One thing I'd add is by doing that as developing the library and developing emulation plans as central research projects, we've benefited tremendously from the collaboration with our participants. For example, as we're developing those plans, we're getting feedback and intel inputs from our participants. We're getting the plans tested by a variety of red teams in range environments that are stood up for each emulation plan. And so having more of our participants actively involved in the refinement and development of those, I think is leading to overall better quality emulation plans, and I think making them more useful to end users.
Yeah, I mean, the emulation library, when I first learned about it, it's such a cool concept. And obviously for us at AttackIQ, like we build automated scenarios, we incorporate the emulation plans into our product, so that's like a key part for us. But if you think about it, like this is the first time you're able to pick an adversary ultimately, and it will be, imagine a bookshelf like the one behind me where you have, APT29, Fin6, bunka, and you can just go down and pull it off and run it against your defenses and know that it's been vetted by, X, Y, and Z Fortune 100 company, plus the big brains that are on the screen in front of you right now, right? It's such a cool concept. I'll take that. I'll sign up for that library. I'll get a library card.
The other thing I think this is, project is a great example of is the fact that, commercial adoption of center R&D, we make it freely available to the world, but we do it under commercially friendly open source licenses. We consider commercial adoption to be a feature, not a bug. We want companies, whether they're center participants or not, to be able to pick up the work and use it, because that's how we ultimately maximize our impact. Because as a nonprofit entity operating in the public interest, fundamentally what we're measured on is our impact. And the question I have to keep answering and should always be able to answer is what impact is your center and its participants in your R&D programming having on the world? You talk about changing the game on the adversary. How are you doing that? Are you doing that? How much are you doing it? And so, when we released that very first, it was our very first R&D project, Fin6 adversary emulation plan. AttackIQ as one of the sponsors of that work was able to, that day announce that, your support for that. I think that's a great example of the kinds of work we're doing in the center. And the fact that then other organizations can pick that up and use it and incorporate it if they choose to is a great example, again, of the power of collaboration.
Yeah. Oh, that was a cool day. I think it was February. I remember. But the next big one, which I want to talk about too, is the NIST 800-53 alignment to MITRE ATT&CK and what that means. Because I saw this as a major strategic movement in the history of cybersecurity. So, John, I want to flip back to you on that project, and then we can open up the conversation.
Yeah, that's a great one, and I think to date that might be our most widely used project. Pretty exciting. So, what we found was just across the attack user community, among our center participants, one of the most frequently requested resources was something that would help organizations and users understand how their security capabilities stood up against attack, right? And so if you were an organization using 853, you wanted to understand of the controls identified in 853, how did those controls help your organization defend against real world threats? Right. Yep. And what we found was there was a number of organizations out there that had done this, but maybe done it in a way that they couldn't share it, or started down this path and realized, wow, it's really a lot of work to take this on. And from our perspective, yeah, it is a tremendous effort to put together mappings for ATT&CK to 853. But it's actually really important. And you look at the user community and the number of organizations that rely on or are required to use 853. If we can take some small steps within the center to make it easier for them to understand how their security controls stack up against real world adversary behaviors, I think we've done everybody a huge service, right? And so that project itself is fundamentally about coming together as a team, putting a really solid set of mappings of attack techniques to the collection of 853 controls that might mitigate those adversary behaviors, and publishing them for the world to use. So that work comes with documentation on the methodology, because we want to be transparent. We want it to be usable. We want people that are using that content to understand how we arrived at those mappings. The mappings are, fundamentally a subjective process. And so to make them useful, we got to document that methodology. We have to help our users understand how we arrived at those decisions, right? Mm-hmm. And then we've provided tools and resources to make it easy to visualize those mappings in the Attack Navigator. So you can see, Attack Navigator layers showing you the techniques that we identified and mapped to various controls. You can see kind of the complete picture for all techniques that we mapped to all of 853. So those resources are up there and available on GitHub now for 853 version 4 and 853 version 5. We mapped ATT&CK version 8, and we're in the process of updating to ATT&CK version 9 following the recent ATT&CK release there.
I think fundamentally what that project represents is a tremendous gift of time back to the community. Because Jon wasn't kidding. I mean, I don't know, I lost count of the number of organizations that said, yeah, we've started to map. And it's a big undertaking. We have that project, which we released last December, has over 6,300 individual mappings of attack techniques to controls in 853 up on our GitHub site. And by us doing this, we're not saying that this is the end all be all for everyone, but it's a great starting point for organizations that are using 853 directly or indirectly through CSF mappings or whatever, to sort of quickly get to that answer.
Cybersecurity framework.
Yeah, sorry, the NIST cybersecurity framework. Yeah. So it's by us doing this job once really well with the support of our center participants, we've just given the community something that they can. So instead of them starting in the sub basement, they're starting on the second or third floor to be able to answer that question. Hey, this thing just happened. They used, Sister just told us about this thing. They mapped it to an attack technique or sub-technique. Do we have a control in place to protect us? And you literally can make that instead of, well, we'll get back to you in 3 months after we do the comprehensive mapping. It's like, yes or no, or whatever the answer is.
Yeah. So ultimately, as a defender, you don't need to worry about doing that detailed analysis of all of ATT&CK to all of 853. You can just focus on your environment, the threats that you care about, and understanding how the controls you've implemented stack up against those threats.
Yeah. I mean, I love this project for a number of reasons, right? When I first started working in cybersecurity, it was sort of compliance was the world, and you had a sense that these folks maybe didn't operate in the threat space that much. Now, I'm not knocking compliance people at all, and I'm not knocking people that use abacuses and keep track of where we are on various things. I'm not knocking those people. But I'd lived in Sudan, I'd lived in the Middle East, I'd seen angry people up front and what they wanted. Plenty of people in the security space have been around the world and seen violence and understood what the nation state, what hostile nation states want to do to you. And it's for the first time you can now take threat behaviors of nation-state actors, people who want to steal your information or break your infrastructure and do really bad things to you, and align it to this compliance framework that had emerged historically as this sort of foundational compliance function. But compliance itself doesn't equal security. And what you've done with this project, and I'm really on the receiving end, so you educated me, and now I'm like, you're John the evangelist on this, is like, you've aligned the threat behaviors so you can actually prove whether or not your compliance is effective. Because what we're talking about is cybersecurity effectiveness. Because just because you're trying to, like, you can check off a compliance box 3 times a year doesn't mean that you're actually being able to carry water when you need to if the adversary comes at you. And the thing about attack, and if you run continuous tests, which is what we're advocating for, is you're actually making the compliance frameworks valuable within a real world context. And that to me is like fundamentally transformative. And I just think it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, I often talk about attack as a lens that you can use. And so in that case, this compliance is a thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a thing, right? It's important to understand and have controls and know what those are. But what attack does is once you've built that threat model of, we're facing nation state actors interested in our intellectual property, or, we're facing criminal groups who are trying to monetize our PII or our patient information or whatever it is, or ransomware. Once you have that threat model, that attack allows you to somewhat mechanically reduce that to then, well, here are the techniques that then you should focus on first. And then from that gives you your punch list of, okay, if these are the techniques that barring any other, in the absence of any other prioritization, probably the best place to start, what are the controls I need to have in place? Oh, yep. Nope, don't got that. Okay, let's see about implementing that control. And it's not now just sort of an unfunded mandate you levy on users. Hey, we're putting this control in place. Well, why? Well, it's because it actually is demonstrated to have efficacy in mitigating this adversary behavior that's of real importance to us. So, that notion of, I think it helps the compliance. I think we help each other. The compliance world, and I was on the Security and Compliance Weekly podcast a little while ago, and a great conversation. And it was really like, you have peanut butter, we have chocolate. And, putting the two together, the whole is truly greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, particularly with peanut butter and chocolate, if we're being honest. I mean, yeah.
I'm not getting hungry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think like ultimately, one of the things that's frustrating about watching these ransomware attacks happening in the last month is we know that we have these tactics and techniques under MITRE ATT&CK, that if companies would just run these emulations against themselves in advance, they could figure out where to invest to prevent a ransomware attack. That's a message that I've tried to get out since after Colonial Pipeline and the JBS hack is like, look, you can actually solve these problems. You have assume breach, invest in best-in-class defenses, and then exercise those defenses using attack. And I think one thing I know we want to go back to the projects and how you've cranked out research so quickly, but could we just talk a little bit about how you've heard from either center participants or others about how attack has helped them improve their efficiency and effectiveness?
Yeah, I so much, to my mind, the fundamental use case of attack, we can tick off a bunch of use cases, and your Attack for Dummies book does a good job of that. But to my mind, the fundamental use case of attack is as that common language. So it's a communications tool. It's a way for people to have meaningful and efficient and accurate conversations about threat in their posture with respect to threat. So fundamentally, I think it's allowed people to paint an evidence-based picture of their security posture for whatever stakeholders they need to communicate that with. So it could be, from SOC director to the CISO, saying, here's where we're at, here's where we're going, from the CISO to the board. It could also be from operational people to vendors saying, we need something that's going to help us fill these 4 gaps. And it sounds simple, and it is a simple concept, but in practice, it's incredibly powerful. So, we have we've seen people in the community using it lots of different ways, but I think fundamentally that using it as a way of communicating in really concrete terms what the posture of the organization is, where you have protections, where you have detections, and I'm sure near and dear to your heart, where you have, continuous validation of those controls. It's all a piece, part of this overall puzzle of painting an accurate data-driven picture of your defenses relative to publicly reported adversary behavior.
Yep, exactly. Jon, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, kind of building on what Rich said there, it gives us a common vocabulary. And so we've seen attack being used and impactful across a pretty wide range of use cases. I think there's a couple other, key things that were sort of goals of attack that we've started to see a real shift in. Is, attack is trying to shift a focus towards understanding adversary behaviors. It's important to track and detect IOCs and focus on IOCs, but we also want to elevate the conversation a bit and think about adversary behaviors. And so, what attack has done is really tried to shift that conversation across the cybersecurity community, and it's done it in a way that puts together this knowledge base, this resource that's easily accessible to all. That's one of the other things that's been really important to, I think, the success and the impact that the MITRE ATT&CK team has had, is that it's open, it's freely available to all. They've done a lot of the hard work to collect and analyze intel reports and put it in a simple, accessible, consistent knowledge base for everybody to build off of.
Yeah, that's such a neat thing. So let's head back to the research that you produced, and then I think we want to move to how to make all this really useful for people. But Jon, how has the center produced so much? What is your secret, and can you share it? I'm willing to buy, whatever secret is. I'll pay for it in a bottle.
Yeah, I think unfortunately I probably already gave the secret away earlier. I think that the reality is that we have a set of participants that are really invested in coming together collaboratively to advance threat-informed defense. It absolutely starts with our participants. We've built a framework for running research projects where we're continually evolving and trying to mature that framework so that we can go from good idea to running project in just a couple of weeks. And we've tried to put ourselves in a position to listen, to hear from all of our participants, understand their problems, understand, their ideas, work broadly across the community to do the same thing, and kind of whittle that down to the set of projects that we run and run them through that framework. So I think I kind of gave a lot of the secret away earlier.
Yeah.
No,
and I'm going to give, and now I'm going to give the rest of it away. One of the things, and Jon and his team do such a great job at this. The reason we never describe the center as a consortium is that we use this I think unique model where while we are encourage and do get direct participation in projects by our participants, ultimately it's MITRE technical staff, MITRE researchers who are responsible for all the heavy lifting in research projects. What that means is our participants get to come in, give us their goals, give us their problem statements, give us their requirements, and then shape those projects. And again, they get to participate in those projects however much or little as they want to while they're running. But Jon and his team have a group of people who are then going to make sure that happens. And we get to reach across the over 8,000 talented technical staff at MITRE to staff projects. But that's one of the reasons we get stuff done. The other reason is we're really kind of picky about our participants. And so everyone shows up, they agree to the ground rules up front, and they show up with resources to make these projects happen. And I think without that, you then wind up in situations which are a lot more like potluck dinners, where you're kind of really counting on everyone to show up that night with the food. And if I get busy and I don't show up with the main course, then I've kind of ruined dinner. So,
Yeah.
we have a different model, and it's worked well for us.
Or if you're in my case, you end up going to Whole Foods at the last minute, so you get the same pecan pie every one. That's. I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm a historian and I'm biased, but like I think history's gonna look back at this and say this was an incredible model because you've got these large organizations. They want to solve these problems. They do not have the research staff that MITRE has. They do not have the time. And when you scale the solution, the team to work on the problem, you bring in smart folks from leading companies all over the world. You're adding into the native research within MITRE, and then solving problems together, which is like fundamentally how, as far as I can tell, the only way to solve these problems in cybersecurity. So
we're also bringing in. I just want to point out we're also, some of our members do have significant research and development staffs, yet they choose to participate in center projects in those areas where they think doing work in an open forum where the results will be freely available to the world actually is the best strategy. So I want to give our members who have extensive R&D staffs, real credit for stepping up and going through that calculus of, is this something we can do in the center, and getting to yes, and then participating, even though they could, they have smart engineers who may very well be able to create something, because they recognize the power of having all these people collaborating to make the project better, to then have more impact, to have more people who have a stake in the project's success. So I just wanted to give them props for that.
That's a good point. I mean, even just on our AttackIQ team, Jose Barajas is a malware researcher, and I know that he's gained tremendous amount and put a lot of effort into the center, and it's been like a force multiplier for his big brain to be able to test ideas with you guys and then benefit from the work of others. So that's a great point. So let's move towards the end of this discussion. That's where we are. And we've been talking at this sort of very high level of research and the concepts that y'all are doing, which is super impressive. And it's available on the GitHub and on your website. But what about for folks that are just beginning to dip their toes into the attack process? Like, how would you recommend folks get started? And what are some other calls to action coming out of looking at your research and what you're doing?
We continue to, and I'll be the first to acknowledge that for all of the great work that's been done in attack and that we've done in the center, I still think that the work is mostly accessible to those organizations with, dedicated cyber threat analysts and relatively robust security teams, and which is a big need. And I think we the MITRE ATT&CK team and the center's R&D projects have met that challenge well. But what about the small regional hospital that has maybe one or two people in IT security, if that, or use a managed security service provider? How are they benefiting from it? And the answer is we don't have resources for them. I mean, they're all accessible, but it takes a certain level of sophistication and resource and time. And so one of the things that we're looking at in MITRE Engenuity is how do we, over time, help this community, much in the same way we've been trying to lower the bar and the barriers through our MITRE ATT&CK Defender training and certification program. How do we lower the barriers? So as a independent, nonprofit organization, how can we make it easier for that regional hospital or that smaller financial institution or that energy company that's serving, upper Midwest market or whatever it is? How do we help them with benefit from attack, knowing that they're not necessarily ever going to have the resources of a Fortune 50 financial institution, but we can't forget about them. We haven't forgotten about them. But it's a challenge, and that's not something we're going to solve by ourselves. That's something I think we're going to have to solve as a community.
Yeah, and I just add, when I think about our research program and the work we've done, Rich mentioned it a little bit ago. Ultimately, we're all about impact. Our goal really is about really trying to make a difference, having impact on cybersecurity. And one of the most important things that we could do in our research program, we might have a great research project and excellent results, but if nobody knows about it, we're not going to have any impact. So I just say, as a kind of a call to action from my perspective, check out what we've done. Tell us what you think about it. Spread the word. If you think it's useful, if you think it's impactful, just help us spread the word. I think that's one of the sort of the critical next steps we need to do to just help raise awareness of the work that we've done and increase the impact of the work that we've done so far. And as I look forward at our research program, stay tuned. There is tremendous demand and interest among our participants in the community in kind of mapping more things to attack to better understand how those capabilities stack up against threats, making it easier for people to kind of take attack internal to their organizations, build upon it, extend it, and stay in sync with the attack knowledge base. So we have work coming in kind of all those areas, and really much more out of the research program. So stay tuned, spread the word, and let us know what you think about the work that's up there.
Well, it is such an honor to partner with both of you. Obviously, at AttackIQ, like we participate in the center. We're big participants in the center. We love echoing your research and sharing it with the world. It's as a writer and communicator, from my standpoint, you make my life a lot easier because you give me such good content to talk about. But then for us as a company, most importantly, our platform and capabilities and our scenario library, our purpose is to make adversary emulations and all the research that you do accessible to companies of every shape and size so that they can test and validate their cybersecurity effectiveness. Rich, you probably didn't mean to tee me up to say that, but we are trying to operationalize and make your research as available and useful to everyone to increase their cybersecurity effectiveness. And we love being partners with you. It's intellectually challenging. We feel like we're at the cutting edge. We are at the cutting edge, and I commend both of you for starting the center and for all the work that you've done in advance and all the work that you're going to continue to do. So thank you very much for coming on today, and appreciate it very much.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today and everyone in attendance. I just would say that the center exists because of our participants. So thank you to AttackIQ and all the center participants who make the work we do possible, because that's ultimately the reason we're able to do what we do, is that organizations have decided to step up and exercise that leadership, both technological leadership and also just sort of setting an example of what it means to invest in collaborative research and development in the public interest, and to demonstrate that can be done in a way that's meaningful, with creating actionable results in a timely manner. I think is really important to sort of just send that message out, that we just sometimes there's some learned helplessness, I think, in our community, and people just get, there's nothing you can do. Actually, I reject that notion. There is absolutely things that we can and should be doing, and we are doing in the Center for Threat Informed Defense.
Well said. Great note to end on. Thanks, gents. We'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
We interrupt this broadcast for, yes, another break. Here's a quick episode of Cyber Snacks while you wait. Let us know what you're snacking on, and we'll be back in a bit.